Chicago never sleeps quietly. Even at 9 in the evening, O'Hare International Airport carries the particular exhaustion of a city that moves too fast for its own good. The terminal hums with the low frequency of 10,000 small urgencies rolling luggage. Overhead announcements the distant rumble of engines on the tarmac. Fluorescent light falls across everything equally the way institutional light always does, without warmth, without preference, without mercy. Gate B14 sits at the far end of Concourse B, past the overpriced sandwich shops and the charging stations where businessmen lean against walls staring at their phones like they contain the answers to questions nobody asked. The gate itself is unremarkable. Rows of connected plastic seats, a large window facing the tarmac, a boarding desk flanked by two monitors, and the particular brand of controlled chaos that defines a Tuesday night departure in November. The departure screen reads "On time" in bright blue letters. It has read "On time" for the past 20 minutes, even though everyone in the gate area understands the flight is running late. UA Flight 412, Chicago O'Hare to JFK, New York. Scheduled departure, 9 p.m., is sitting at the end of the jet bridge, with its doors still open and its captain increasingly unhappy. The passengers know it. The gate agents know it. The screen does not care. Brenda Kowalski has worked Gate B14, or gates very much like it, for 12 years. She knows the rhythms of delay the way a sailor knows weather, not from charts, but from the body, from something felt before it is named. She knows the precise moment when impatience becomes complaint, when complaint becomes confrontation, and when confrontation becomes the kind of incident that ends up in a supervisor's report the following morning. She has learned to move slightly faster in those moments, to smile slightly wider, to keep her voice at exactly the pitch that communicates competence without warmth, efficiency without invitation. Tonight she is moving at that pace already. Her uniform is pressed, her dark hair pulled back with practiced neatness, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose in a way that suggests she is always half a second from needing them. She works the boarding desk with the focused rhythm of someone who has done this thousands of times: passport open, scan, glance, return next, and the line moves because she makes it move, because her efficiency is the only engine currently running at Gate B14. Behind her, the second monitor shows the current boarding list. Business class first, then Sky Priority, then the general population, sorted into groups that most passengers pretend not to resent. The priority lane is already filling. Expensive coats, rolling carry-ons with brand names worn like credentials, the particular posture of people accustomed to being first. Brenda calls it without looking up. Business class and Sky Priority passengers may now board. Business class and Sky Priority. The line forms almost immediately, the way it always does, with the quiet competitive urgency of people who have paid for the right not to wait and intend to exercise it fully. A man in a charcoal suit steps forward first, already holding his boarding pass at the ready. Behind him, a woman in her 60s adjusts her carry-on with the practiced movement of someone who has done this commute dozens of times. A younger man in a linen jacket speaks into his phone while walking, assuming the gate agent will adapt to him rather than the other way around. Brenda adapts. She always does. She is midway through the fourth passenger, a heavy-set man with a connecting flight to London who wants to discuss lounge access at JFK in considerable detail when she first sees the boy. He is standing near the back of the priority lane, which is itself unusual. Priority passengers do not stand near the back. They position themselves at the front sometimes before the lane opens, because waiting is a thing they have paid to avoid. The boy has not done this. He simply appeared in the line quietly and without announcement, the way children sometimes appear in places where adults were not expecting them. He is small. That is the first thing. Small even by the standards of 10-year-olds, with narrow shoulders and a build that makes the backpack he carries look almost comically oversized. The backpack is dark blue, worn at the corners with a small patch of lighter color on one strap, where the fabric has been rubbed smooth by use. His hoodie is gray, or was gray once. Now it carries the particular softness of a garment that has been washed many times, that has become comfortable enough to be trusted. His jeans are dark. His sneakers are white, or mostly white, with the honest scuffs of actual use, rather than the deliberate distressing that passes for fashion. He is black. He is young. He is alone. He is not looking at his phone. He is not fidgeting. He is not doing any of the things that children do when they are nervous or bored or uncertain. He is simply standing in the priority lane with his hands resting lightly on the straps of his backpack, watching the aircraft through the gate windows with an expression of complete and unsettling calm. Not the performed calm of a child trying to appear older than he is. Something more settled than that. Something that comes from a place deeper than performance. Brenda notices him the way you notice something that does not fit, not with alarm, not yet, but with the small friction of a pattern interrupted. She finishes with the London man manages his lounge access question with 3 sentences and moves to the next passenger. But something in her attention has shifted. It is sitting now in the corner of her awareness like a pebble in a shoe, small but impossible to ignore entirely. 2 passengers later, he reaches the desk. He steps forward and places his documents on the counter. Not nervously, not with the eager helpfulness of a child trying to prove something. He simply places them down flat and neat and looks at her with dark eyes that are quiet in a way she cannot immediately categorize. Patient, watchful, the eyes of someone who has learned to observe before concluding. Brenda picks up the boarding pass automatically. She reads it automatically. Then she stops. Business class, seat 3A, Chicago to JFK. The name reads M. Webb in capital letters across the top. She looks at the boy. She looks at the boarding pass. She looks at the boy again. This boarding pass is for business class, she says. She does not mean it as an accusation. She will tell herself later that she does not mean it as an accusation. But the sentence comes out with a particular emphasis for business class that positions the boarding pass somewhere the boy is not. He nods once, a single small unhurried movement. Yes, ma'am. His voice is calm, lower than she expected with a steadiness that does not belong to nervousness or performance. It is simply the voice of someone stating a fact that does not require elaboration, that has never required elaboration, that is simply true. The way all facts are true completely without needing anyone's agreement. Brenda opens the passport. American, valid. The photograph matches the face in front of her. The date of birth is correct. She does a rapid mental calculation, the kind that happens without deciding to do it, and confirms what she already suspected 10 years old. She glances over his shoulder behind him, past him to the larger gate area. She is looking for a parent, for an adult of any kind, for someone who should be here and is not. There is no one. Where are your parents? They're meeting me in New York. He says it simply, not rehearsed, not defensive, simply. The way a person states something true that has been true for a while that requires no qualification because it is merely fact. Brenda leans back slightly from the desk. The line behind him has slowed. She is aware of it the way you are always aware of a line slowing with the peripheral guilt of someone whose job is to keep things moving. You're traveling alone. Yes. Who checked you in? A driver dropped me off. I checked in at the kiosk. The line behind him has not resumed moving. 2 passengers, back a man in a navy suit, shifts his weight from one foot to the other in the way that signals impatience without committing to complaint. A woman behind him has lowered her sunglasses slightly to look at the boy directly. Someone farther back murmurs something to a companion. The sound is too low for Brenda to catch the words, but the tone is legible, even at a distance. She lowers her voice. Not all the way, but enough to suggest she is doing the boy a courtesy. How old are you, Mom? 10. The word lands in the small space between them. Brenda presses her lips together. She looks at the ticket again. Fully paid. Business class. No system flag, no fraud alert, no issue of any kind that the computer has chosen to identify. And yet something in her is certain, the particular certainty that comes not from evidence, but from expectation, from the accumulated weight of what is supposed to be true, that something here is wrong. She cannot name what is wrong. If she were asked, she could not point to a single fact that supports her certainty. But the certainty is there, and it is strong, and she has learned over 12 years at the desk to trust her instincts. What she has not examined, not yet, is whether this particular instinct deserves that trust. Step aside for a moment, please. He does not move immediately, not in defiance. He simply pauses as if the request requires a brief assessment before a response can be formed. Is there a problem? The question is polite, completely polite. It is the kind of question a reasonable person asks when asked to step aside for reasons that have not been explained. But it makes Brenda defensive in a way she does not fully understand, and the defensiveness comes out as efficiency. I just need to verify something. Please step aside. He steps aside, without argument, without visible frustration. He moves to the wall beside the boarding gate and stands there with his backpack still on, hands folded in front of him, watching everything around him with the same unhurried attention with which he was watching the aircraft a few minutes ago. He does not slouch against the wall. He does not look at the floor. He simply occupies the space he has been given and makes it his own through the quiet insistence of his composure. Something about that stillness bothers Brenda more than argument would have. Argument she knows how to handle. Stillness like this she does not have a procedure for. She continues boarding. The line moves again. The man in the navy suit steps forward with his boarding pass already extended, his expression, the smoothed-over version of mild contempt that experienced travelers have refined into something almost undetectable. He boards. The woman behind him boards. One by one, the priority passengers pass through, some staring openly at the boy against the wall, some performing elaborate indifference, one older gentleman giving Marcus a slow nod that might mean something and might mean nothing at all. Nobody stops. Nobody asks. The passengers who notice him carry their observations with them onto the aircraft, wrapped in the comfortable certainty that whatever is happening at the gate is the gate's problem and not theirs. It is a rational decision. It is also the kind of rational decision that becomes its own kind of failure. The small, unremarkable failure of ordinary people in ordinary moments, choosing the path of least involvement. Brenda picks up her desk phone and makes the call she already knew she was going to make. Garrett Haynes has been a gate supervisor at O'Hare for 19 years. He is 51 years old, solidly built, with the kind of face that has settled into permanent mild authority. Not unkind exactly, but accustomed to being right. Accustomed to having the final word in small disputes. Accustomed to the efficient resolution of problems that are in his long experience almost always exactly what they appear to be. He has developed over nearly 2 decades a taxonomy of airport situations. He knows which ones require intervention and which ones resolve themselves. He knows the difference between a genuine security concern and a passenger relations problem dressed up as one. What he does not know or has stopped asking himself is whether his taxonomy was built on complete information or whether it was built on the particular sample of situations that his particular position in the world allowed him to see. He arrives at Gate B14 with the unhurried confidence of a man who has handled 1,000 variations of whatever this is going to be. Brenda meets him at the edge of the desk. She keeps her voice low. Unaccompanied minor, business class, traveling alone, says his parents are meeting him in New York. Garrett takes the boarding pass from her. He reads it. He looks toward the wall where the boy is standing. And in that first look, the very first one, before a single word has been exchanged, before a single fact beyond the boy's appearance and location has been established, something settles behind Garrett's eyes. Something that has already decided. Something that dressed itself in the language of professional judgment, but was formed before any judgment was possible. He walks over. "What's your name?" "Marcus Webb." Garrett nods the way people nod when they are not really processing the answer, when the question was more procedure than inquiry. "And your parents are in New York." "My mother is already in New York. My father is flying in tomorrow from Seattle." "Who purchased this ticket?" There is a brief pause, not hesitation, not the pause of someone caught, but the pause of someone choosing words with care, selecting the ones that are accurate without being more than what is required. "My family's office did." Garrett's expression does not change, but something behind it does. The answer does not fit the picture. He adjusts the picture slightly rather than reconsidering the fit. "Your family's office." "Yes, sir." Behind them at the desk, Brenda has stopped typing. 2 nearby passengers who have not yet boarded are no longer pretending not to listen. The space between the boarding desk and the wall where Marcus stands has become in the way of public spaces during quiet confrontations, a kind of theater that nobody chose to attend, but nobody is leaving. Garrett crosses his arms. It is a slow movement, deliberate, the physical equivalent of a door closing. He positions himself slightly between Marcus and the boarding lane, an arrangement that looks accidental but is not. "Here is what I need you to understand. Children do not board commercial flights alone with premium tickets and no adult escort unless everything, and I mean everything, is in absolute order. If there is something you are not telling me right now, is the time to say it." "There is nothing I am not telling you," Marcus says. "My documents are in my bag." "Then I'll need to see them." Marcus reaches for the zipper of his backpack. It is a calm, slow movement, the movement of someone retrieving a document from a bag they have packed themselves and know the contents of completely. His hand finds the zipper pull and begins to draw it open. Stop. Garrett's voice cuts across the gate with enough volume and sharpness that three nearby conversations die instantly. Even Brenda looks up from her desk with an expression she cannot quite control, something between surprise and recognition. She has heard that tone before, but not directed at a child standing quietly against a wall. Garrett takes one step forward and extends his hand palm out. Do not reach into that bag until security personnel are present. The gate goes quiet in a particular way. Not the ambient quiet of an empty space, but the alert quiet of a room full of people who have all just received the same signal at the same moment. Heads turn, feet shift. The informal geometry of the waiting area contracts, drawn inward by the gravity of something happening that was not supposed to happen here. Somewhere near the window seats, a teenager in a leather jacket reaches slowly into his jacket pocket and retrieves his phone, tilting it with the practiced casualness of someone who has recorded things in public before and knows how to be invisible while doing it. And Marcus. Marcus stands completely still. He has stopped reaching for the zipper. His hand rests now at his side, exactly where Garrett's command placed it, as if the command itself had weight, and that weight had settled on him. His face has not changed into fear. It has not changed into anger. It has changed into something harder to name, a quiet, settled kind of disappointment so deep it seems familiar. So familiar it seems old. The disappointment of someone who has been here before in some version of this exact place and had allowed himself the private luxury of hoping this time would be different. He looks at Garrett for a long moment. The look contains nothing aggressive. It contains no plea for understanding. It is simply the look of a child absorbing a reality that adults around him have created and that he now has to live inside of, at least for the time being. Then he removes his hand from the zipper entirely and lets both arms rest at his sides. All right, he says. 2 words. Quiet. No protest, no explanation, no appeal to fairness or logic or the evidence of his own legitimacy. Just all right. The teenager near the window has not put his phone down. The gate area rearranges itself in the way spaces rearrange when something worth watching has begun. Passengers who are reading put down their books. Passengers who were scrolling through their phones tilt them face down on their laps and turn their attention to the boy by the wall. The individual scattered arrangement of people pretending they are not sharing a space tightens and becomes communal, not through any decision, but through the particular human gravity of public conflict, which pulls attention the way weather pulls barometric pressure. Marcus has not moved from where he was told to stand. He is against the wall 3 feet from the boarding gate with his backpack on and his hands at his sides. He is watching the aircraft through the window. The aircraft is still there. The jet bridge is still connected. The departure clock is still moving, indifferent to the drama accumulating beneath it. Garrett returns to the desk and speaks to Brenda in a low voice. She nods. She picks up the phone. The call she makes is short, 2 sentences, the kind of call that has been rehearsed by institutional habit into something mechanical. At the far end of the gate, the teenager in the leather jacket holds his phone at an angle that no longer pretends to be texting. Across from him, an older couple in matching gray travel jackets speak to each other in the low, deliberate tones of people exchanging observations they do not want to carry alone. The husband says something. The wife looks at Marcus, then at Garrett, then back at her husband. She responds. He glances at his hands and does not speak again. A woman in a tan blazer with a press badge clipped to the strap of her bag shifts slightly in her seat. She does not take out a phone. She simply adjusts her position so that she has a clear and unobstructed line of sight to both Marcus and the boarding desk, and she watches with the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who are paid to notice things and have learned to do so without announcing themselves. Brenda puts down the phone. She turns back to the boarding desk and resumes processing the remaining business class passengers, but her movements have lost their rhythm. She is slower than she was. She keeps finding her eyes moving without permission back to the boy at the wall. He is not fidgeting. He is not shifting his weight or looking at the floor or searching the room for someone to help him. He is simply occupying the position he has been placed in with a composure that is in its own way more unsettling than tears would have been. Because tears can be managed. Tears have a protocol. Whatever Marcus Webb is doing, this patient-contained watchful waiting does not have a protocol that Brenda can locate. A woman from the boarding line pauses before handing over her document. She leans slightly toward the desk. Is that child all right? Brenda gives the professional smile, the one she has worn so many times. It has its own muscle memory, the one that communicates everything is under control without specifying what control is being exercised or on whose behalf. Just a verification issue, ma'am. He's fine. The woman looks at Marcus for a moment longer than Brenda would like. He seems very calm for someone being treated that way. Before Brenda can respond, Garrett appears at her shoulder. He addresses the woman with the smooth efficiency of someone who has redirected conversations like this one many times. We appreciate your concern. Everything is being handled appropriately. If you could proceed to the gate, ma'am. The woman looks at Garrett. She looks at Marcus. She looks at Garrett again. And in that second look, there is something that has moved past polite uncertainty into something sharper, something that has formed a view and is deciding whether to express it. Then she takes her boarding pass and walks onto the jet bridge without another word. But the look she gave, the particular quality and duration of it, does not leave the room with her. It stays behind, hovering in the space she vacated, and several passengers who witnessed it nod almost imperceptibly at each other, the small acknowledgement of shared perception. Brenda finds herself reaching for the reservation file again. She opens it, clicks through to the full booking details. The ticket is legitimate, paid in full. No irregularities, no flags, no system warnings of any kind. The computer, which does not have assumptions, has found nothing wrong. She clicks deeper through the standard fields. She checks every day into the service notes, the internal handling annotations that most gate agents look at only when something has already gone wrong. She finds the note at the bottom of the secondary handling field, where it has been sitting since before Marcus Webb ever walked into the priority lane. 4 words, then a 5-word instruction. VIP handling requested. Do not alter seat assignment. She reads it once. The words are plain and unambiguous. She reads it again. They say the same thing the second time. The paper tray beside her keyboard produces a single printed sheet when she presses the button. She picks it up, folds it once neatly along the center, places it beside the keyboard where she will not forget it is there. She looks toward Garrett. He is facing the jet bridge, his back partially to her, checking something on his operations tablet. His posture is the posture of a man who has made a decision and is now managing its consequences. She looks at the folded paper. She does not pick it up. She does not show it to him. She tells herself she needs a moment to think about what it means. She tells herself it might not be relevant. She tells herself there are still legitimate questions about the passenger's situation that need to be resolved. She tells herself a number of things, and each of them is partially true, and none of them is the complete truth. And somewhere in the space between the partial truths and the complete one, the folded paper sits beside the keyboard and waits. The jet bridge door opens at 9:28 p.m. Audrey Fleming steps through it with the controlled efficiency of someone who has been waiting for information that is not arriving fast enough and has decided to come and find it herself. She is the senior flight attendant for UA 41243 years old, with the composed authority of someone who has spent 2 decades managing the space between what passengers want and what is actually possible. She has kept premium cabins calm through mechanical delays, medical emergencies, weather diversions, and the particular collective unraveling that happens when people who are accustomed to comfort find themselves without it. She has not in 20 years of flying seen a gate delay run this long without a clear resolution. The aircraft is ready. The crew is ready. The captain's patience, which is professional and substantial, is approaching its practical limits. She walks directly to Garrett. Captain Merritt wants to know why boarding is still incomplete. Documentation issue with a minor passenger. She follows his line of sight to Marcus standing at the wall. Her expression shifts, a small movement controlled but visible to anyone paying attention. She looks at the boy for a moment. He is still. He is upright. He is watching the aircraft through the window with an expression that she cannot immediately categorize, and that stays with her. She looks back at Garrett. Did anyone verify the booking we are in the process of? That is not what I asked. The sentence is quiet, professional. It does not raise its voice. But it is precise in the way that a scalpel is precise. It cuts to exactly what it intends to cut to and no further. It occupies the space it is meant to occupy, and Garrett feels it, though he does not show that he feels it. With respect, he says, gate procedures are gate management's responsibility. I appreciate the concern. The captain is going to escalate this in the next 8 minutes if we miss departure entirely. She looks at Marcus one more time. Something moves across her face, something fast and weather-like, here and gone. Did anyone offer him water? Garrett does not answer immediately. Audrey turns and walks back toward the jet bridge without waiting for the answer. She pauses at the door. She looks at Brenda directly, not at Garrett, at Brenda. She says, not loudly, not with judgment, simply as a statement of what seems obvious to her. Somebody should offer him water. Then the door closes behind her. Brenda looks at the cup dispenser on the desk beside her. It is right there. It would take less than 30 seconds. She is aware of how simple it would be, and she is aware of Garrett's position in the room, and she is aware of the particular institutional dynamic that makes junior staff hesitate before visibly contradicting a supervisor's unspoken position in front of passengers and colleagues. She looks at the folded paper beside the keyboard. She does not move toward the cup dispenser. The two security officers arrive at 9:31 p.m. Officer Leonard Okafor comes through the gate area entrance first. He is 54 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and eyes that move through a room with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has learned that what matters is rarely what announces itself. He carries the particular calm of a man who has walked into the middle of situations like this one, many times not because he is indifferent to them, but because he understands that calm is the most useful thing he can bring. Officer Diane Stoll follows 2 steps behind him. Younger, lean, with the alert stillness of someone who catalogs everything before responding to any of it. She has a notepad in her left hand before she has fully entered the gate area. She begins reading the room immediately, not intrusively, but thoroughly, the way a careful person reads a document they know will matter later. Garrett moves forward to meet them. Thank you for coming. We have an unaccompanied minor with a premium ticket who has declined to provide proper verification and refused to cooperate with. Marcus speaks before Garrett finishes the sentence. I did not refuse. His voice is not loud, but it is clear and direct, and in the particular silence that currently lives in Gate B14 clear is more than enough. Every person in the room hears it. Several of them look at Garrett to see how he will respond to the correction. He does not respond to it. He continues as if it was not said. Okafor does not continue as if it was not said. He looks at the boy. Not the quick professional scan that someone uses to assess an immediate threat, a rapid triangulation of variables toward a security conclusion. A longer look, the kind that is actually looking, the kind that takes in not just position and appearance, but expression and posture, and the specific quality of a person's stillness, which tells you more than most words do. He walks past Garrett around him and stops a few feet in front of Marcus. How old are you, son? 10, sir. Traveling alone tonight? Yes, sir. Do you have identification? My passport is with them. Marcus nods toward the boarding desk, a small economical gesture. Okafor holds his hand out toward Garrett without turning around. There is something in the angle of the gesture, the patience in it, that is not quite a command, but is also not quite a request. It is the gesture of a man who has been doing this long enough that the hierarchy of the situation is clear to him, even when others in the room are confused about it. Garrett hands over the passport. Okafor opens it. He reads it carefully. The photograph, the date of birth, the name, the issuing authority, the validity dates. He reads all of it at his own pace without rushing, the way a person reads something they actually intend to know, rather than something they intend to have glanced at. He closes it. Is there an emergency contact number in your documents? He asks Marcus. Yes, sir, in my bag. Any objection to us looking at those documents? No, sir. A brief pause. That's what I was trying to do when I was stopped. Okafor turns his head and looks at Garrett. The look contains no accusation. It does not need to. It contains a question delivered without words in the particular language that experienced people use when they already know the answer and want the person in front of them to understand that they know it. Garrett receives the look. He does not answer it. You can open your bag, Okafor says to Marcus. Slowly, please. Garrett steps forward. I'd like to be present and have the bag placed on the desk before. I am security, Okafor says. Still calm, still quiet. but with a precision in it that makes the sentence more substantial than its 4 words would suggest. Each word sits where it is placed and does not move. Garrett stops. Marcus bends down with care and unzips the backpack. He reaches inside with the unhurried precision of someone who knows exactly where everything is, because he packed it himself and has thought about what might be needed and where it would be most easily found. He removes a slim leather folder. He stands back up and holds it out to Okafor. Okafor opens the folder. He reads, and as he reads, something in Gate B14 shifts, again, not dramatically, not with any announcement or visible drama, but in the quiet, irreversible way that a room shifts when the thing that was supposed to be one thing turns out to be something else entirely. When the evidence that was supposed to confirm the assumption turns out instead to contradict it completely. Because the folder is everything it should be and more. Signed travel authorization with notarized signatures and company letterhead. Emergency contact details, 2 names, 2 numbers, annotated with current time zones and preferred contact hours. Private terminal transfer instructions for JFK arrival. Airline handling codes. A secondary letter from the family's legal office confirming independent travel arrangements and waiving escort requirements. Every document in its proper place, properly executed, properly organized by someone who knew exactly what would be needed and made sure it was there. Officer Stoll leans in slightly and reads over Okafor's shoulder. She straightens. She looks once at Garrett, not a long look, not an unkind one, just a look. The precise duration of a look that says, I understand now what happened here, and I am marking it. Garrett stares at the folder in Okafor's hands. He stares at it the way a man stares at something that has just told him something he did not want to know. And somewhere in the honest part of him, the part that 19 years of institutional habit has compressed but not entirely extinguished, he begins to understand that the problem at Gate B14 was never the boy. It was the moment before the first question. The moment when a 10-year-old in a gray hoodie stepped into the priority boarding lane and Garrett looked at him. That specific moment, the one before procedure, before documentation, before anything that could legitimately be called professional judgment. The moment in which something decided without any evidence, without any fact, without any legitimate basis that this child was in the wrong place. That moment. That is where the problem began. And everything that happened after it, every question asked, every delay imposed, every escalation made, was built on the foundation of that moment, which was not a professional judgment at all. It was something older and more personal than a professional judgment. Something that had worn the clothing of professional judgment for so long that Garrett had stopped noticing the difference. Okafor hands the folder back to Marcus. He does it the way you return something valuable to its owner, carefully, directly, without making the return into a performance of generosity. Simply, this is yours, here it is. Marcus takes it, puts it back in his bag, zips the bag closed with the same unhurried care with which he had opened it. He stands up straight again. Outside the window, under the cold November floodlights, UA Flight 412 sits waiting. The jet bridge is still connected. The departure clock reads 9:34 p.m. 34 minutes past scheduled departure. The gate is still open. The delay is still growing, accumulating costs that are financial and reputational, and human, adding to themselves the way delays always do when the thing causing them is not yet resolved. And Marcus Webb stands against the wall of Gate B14 with his backpack on and his leather folder under his arm, watching the aircraft the same way he has been watching it since he was told to step aside. With the patient, settled calm of someone who has always known that the aircraft is his, that his seat is waiting, and that all he has to do is wait for the people around him to arrive at the same conclusion. Behind him, Brenda looks at the folded paper beside her keyboard. At the boarding desk, the phone begins to ring. The phone rang 4 times before Brenda picked it up. She already knew, in the way that people who have worked long enough in institutional systems develop a kind of atmospheric awareness about incoming information, that this call was not going to simplify the next hour. There was something in the timing of it arriving exactly as Okafor finished reading the folder, exactly as the silence in Gate B14 was settling into a new and more uncomfortable shape that felt less like coincidence and more like the first tremor of something larger working its way to the surface. She picked up the receiver, listened. Her face changed in the small, controlled way that faces change when the information arriving is worse than expected, but not entirely surprising. She said yes twice and no once, And then she said she understood, and then she replaced the receiver with the careful motion of someone buying themselves 2 additional seconds before having to act on what they have just been told. She did not look at Garrett immediately. She looked at the folded paper beside her keyboard instead. The single printed sheet she had produced more than 20 minutes ago and had not shown to anyone. The one with 4 words and a 5-word instruction that had been sitting in the reservation file since before Marcus Webb ever stepped into the priority boarding lane. She had folded it and placed it and told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She picked it up now, unfolded it with the slow deliberateness of someone choosing honesty over the ongoing convenience of postponement. She looked at Garrett. He was still standing near the center of the gate in the position he had occupied since security arrived between Marcus and the boarding desk. The position of authority, managing a situation, a position that was becoming harder to maintain with each passing minute, as the situation made increasingly clear that his authority in this case had been exercised incorrectly. His arms were crossed, his jaw was set, but something in his eyes was beginning to do the arithmetic that the rest of him was not yet ready to do openly. "Corporate called," Brenda said. Her voice was quiet, professional, stripped to the bare structure of information delivery. "They're asking why a passenger flagged for priority executive handling is currently under a security review at the gate." Garrett looked at her. "They used the word flagged," she said. She set the folded paper on the desk between them, not handed it to him, placed it. The way you place evidence when you want it to speak for itself. He read it where it was from where he stood without picking it up. The reading took less than 5 seconds. 4 words, 5 words. Simple and unambiguous. The language of a system that had tried to tell someone something and had not been listened to. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. In the context of a busy airport gate, 10 seconds of complete silence is a long time. In that silence, the teenager near the window maintained his phone angle with the careful neutrality of someone aware that how he holds it matters. Officer Stoll made a note in her pad without looking up. Okafor stood beside Marcus, not close enough to crowd him, not far enough to leave him alone in the stance of a man who has decided that his presence in this specific location is the most useful thing he can offer right now. The couple in matching travel jackets had stopped whispering entirely. Garrett picked up the folded paper. "Read it once more. Set it back down." "Why didn't you show me this earlier?" he said. Brenda met his eyes. "I found it after you called security." It was true. Technically, precisely, completely true in its individual components. It was also in place beside everything else that had happened in the gate, since she found it a truth that coexisted with other truths in a way that did not reflect well on any of them. Everyone who heard it understood that, including Brenda. The particular quality of her stillness as she said it made that understanding visible. Garrett turned away from the desk. At 9:38 p.m., Audrey Fleming came back through the jet bridge door. She moved with the compressed efficiency of someone carrying a message from someone who does not typically need to send messages twice. She had the focused expression of a crew member who has crossed the line from professional concern into institutional urgency and is not planning to turn back. "Captain Merritt is on his second call with operations," she said, directing the words at Garrett with the directness of someone who has decided that ambiguity is no longer useful. "We've lost the original departure slot. There's a rescheduled window at 9:55 if we board completely in the next 12 minutes. After that, it becomes an operations-level decision, and nobody at this gate is going to enjoy being part of that conversation." She paused. She looked at Marcus at the wall. She looked at the security officers. She looked at the folded paper that was now visible on the desk between Brenda and the empty space where Garrett had been standing. Audrey Fleming had been flying long enough to read a gate the way a diagnostician reads a patient. Not the surface presentation, not the stated complaint, but the weight and arrangement of everything underneath the things that the surface is being used to cover or to manage. And what she read at Gate B14 in this moment was not a security situation. It was not a documentation irregularity. It was not an unaccompanied minor concern. It was a mistake that had been given the uniform of procedure, a mistake that was now standing in the middle of a departure gate on a Tuesday night in November, growing more expensive and more public with each minute that passed, because the people responsible for it had not yet found a way to step back from it without the stepping back itself becoming the visible center of the story. She walked to the cup dispenser beside the boarding desk. She filled a paper cup with water. She carried it across the gate to where Marcus was standing and set it on the empty seat beside him, not handing it to him as if he were fragile, not making it a performance of kindness, just placing it there, the way you put something within reach of someone who might want it, leaving the wanting up to them. She stood beside him for a moment. "You've been very patient," she said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation, the acknowledgement of something she had noticed and thought deserved to be named. Marcus looked at the cup, then at her. "Thank you. Are you hungry? We have. Just the water is fine." She nodded. She stayed where she was for another moment, not because she had more to say, but because the act of staying, the simple, visible act of remaining beside him in a room where everyone else had kept moving, carried its own meaning. Sometimes presence is the only available form of decency, and choosing it is still a choice. "My mother says airports show you who people really are," Marcus said. He was looking at the aircraft again when he said it, not at Audrey. Looking at the aircraft through the window the way he had been looking at it since this started, steadily, without urgency, like someone watching for something they know is coming, rather than hoping for something they are not certain of. Audrey had no answer for that. She was not sure one existed. She gave him a small nod, more to herself than to him, and walked back toward the jet bridge. The door closed quietly behind her. The water sat on the seat beside Marcus. He picked it up after a moment and held it in both hands without drinking. Just held it. The holding was its own kind of anchor. Okafor waited until the gate had resettled, until the residual motion of Audrey's departure had stilled, and the room had found its new arrangement before he did it. He reached into his jacket pocket without announcement, without looking at Garrett, without making the gesture into anything more than what it was. He removed his personal cell phone and held it out toward Marcus. "You can make a call," he said. "Take whatever time you need." Garrett turned from where he was standing. "We're still in the middle of a verification process, and I don't think it's appropriate to." "He has the right to contact someone." Okafor's voice did not change pitch or temperature. It remained exactly what it had been: calm, direct, unhurried. "That's not a procedural question. That's a basic question." The two men looked at each other. Not a confrontation exactly. More like two fundamentally different understandings of the same situation, occupying the same room, and finding, when they finally came close enough to examine each other, that they had nothing to negotiate. Garrett said nothing further. Marcus took the phone. He held it carefully with both hands and dialed from memory. No searching, no hesitation, no consulting of a saved contact. The number was simply there, the way the numbers of people who matter to you become part of the body rather than a stored piece of data. He turned slightly away from the center of the room. Not hiding, just creating a small envelope of private air in a space that had very little of it left. The call connected almost immediately. The passengers nearby could not hear the other side of the conversation. What they could hear was one side of it, the low, measured cadence of a 10-year-old conducting a conversation with a composure that belonged to someone significantly older. They heard him say "it's me" in the tone that assumes recognition rather than requesting it. They heard him say "yes" still at the gate as confirmation. They heard him say "no, I'm all right" in a way that carried more weight than the literal meaning of the words. And then they heard the thing that changed the quality of attention in the gate completely, that stopped conversations and lowered phones and caused Officer Stoll to pause with her pen above her notepad. They heard him say "no, don't call yet." A pause. "Let them fix it themselves first." Another pause longer than the first. I know that, but I want to see if they can." His voice was the same throughout, the same temperature, the same pace, the same quality of settled attention. Not performing strength for an audience, not managing his composure for his own protection. Just a boy on a phone occupying that particular difficult territory between what childhood allows and what experience has already taught, making a deliberate decision about how much room to give the people who had treated him like a problem before confirming that he was a problem. He ended the call, handed the phone back to Okafor. "Thank you, sir." Okafor took the phone and pocketed it without comment. But he looked at Marcus for a moment with something in his expression that was not surprise. It was beyond surprise, because surprise implies an expectation that has been violated. And what Okafor felt was something closer to recognition. The recognition of someone who has encountered, in a place he did not expect, and in a form he had not anticipated, something worth the full weight of his attention. Officer Stoll had stopped writing in her notepad. Near the window, the teenager with the phone had lowered it by about half an inch without appearing to notice he had done it. He was looking at Marcus now instead of through the lens of his camera, and the looking was different from recording. It was simply looking. The woman with the press badge had gone very still. Garrett stood near the desk with his arms no longer crossed. He had not uncrossed them deliberately, they had simply fallen to his sides at some point during Marcus's phone call, as if the physical posture of certainty had become too heavy to maintain. He was looking at a point somewhere between the desk and the far wall, his face doing the quiet interior work of a man revising something he had invested in being certain about. Brenda looked at her hands, then at the folded paper on the desk, then at Marcus. She thought about the note she had printed and folded and not shown anyone. She thought about all the small moments between finding it and now in which she could have said something and had chosen each time not to. Each of those moments had seemed individually defensible. Together, laid end to end, they made something she did not want to look at directly. The gate phone rang again at 9:46 p.m. Brenda answered. This time her face changed with less control. The information arriving moved too fast for the professional management of expression. She said, "Yes, he is," and then one moment, and she held the receiver toward Garrett. He took it. For the next 90 seconds, Garrett Haynes stood at the boarding desk of Gate B14 and listened. His posture changed in stages, first the shoulders, which lost some of their set, then the jaw, which shifted, then the area around his eyes, which acquired the specific contained tension of a man receiving information he cannot process privately because he is doing it in public. He said, "Yes, sir," twice, and "I understand" once, and each time he said it, his voice was slightly different from the time before. He put the phone down. He stood there without speaking for a moment. Brenda waited. She had learned over 12 years when to ask and when to wait, and this was a waiting moment. Corporate operations transferred the call to senior oversight, Garrett said. He spoke carefully the way a person speaks when they are choosing words not for their rhetorical effect, but for their technical accuracy, because accuracy is all that is left. They are asking why a passenger with executive protection classification is currently being held at the gate under a security review. He looked at the phone without picking it up. They used the word held, he said. The word sat in the gate area with its full weight. It was not a word that could be managed or redirected or placed in a more favorable context. It was simply what was true. A 10-year-old boy with valid documents and a valid ticket and every right to board his flight was being held at a gate. The word was accurate. Its accuracy was the problem. Brenda looked at Marcus. He was sitting now in the chair beside the paper cup of water, which he had set down on the seat next to him. He was watching the tarmac through the window with the same expression he had worn since the beginning. Patient, still the expression of someone watching a process work its way to its conclusion, and having made peace long before the process began with whatever conclusion it would reach. Officer Stoll leaned toward Okafor and said something low. He nodded once, a small, contained agreement. The teenager near the window had finally put his phone fully down. He was watching Garrett with the open, unguarded attention of someone who has given up performing indifference because what is happening in the room no longer makes indifference feel appropriate. The woman with the press badge was on her phone, now turned slightly away from the center of the gate. Her free hand moved across a small notepad balanced on her knee, writing quickly in the compressed shorthand of someone capturing something before it changes shape. Garrett turned from the desk and walked across the gate toward Marcus. His pace was measured the pace of a man trying to project control over a situation in which his control has been significantly diminished, and knowing in the way that experienced people know things, even when they do not want to, that the projection is no longer convincing anyone. He stopped in front of Marcus. He looked at the boy, and for the first time since he had arrived at Gate B14 and looked at a child standing in a priority boarding lane and made a decision before he asked a single question. Garrett Haynes looked at Marcus Webb without the filter of what he had already decided. He saw a small boy in a gray hoodie that had been washed many times, a dark blue backpack on the floor beside the chair, a paper cup on the adjacent seat, a leather folder resting across his knees, dark, quiet eyes watching him without hostility, without triumph, without any visible feeling that Garrett could interpret as a judgment, only a kind of deep, tired patience that had its own history, its own weight, its own story that had been accumulating long before tonight. Marcus, Garrett said. The name came out correctly, with care. Marcus waited, giving the name a moment of silence before what followed. There were assumptions made tonight, Garrett said. Some of them should not have been made. It was not an apology. It occupied the geography of an apology without having its architecture. It was built from acknowledgement rather than regret, from recognition rather than feeling. The kind of thing a man says when he understands intellectually that something was wrong but has not yet traveled far enough into that understanding to feel it in the way that the person in front of him has been feeling it for the last 40 minutes. Marcus listened. He did not nod. He did not offer the visible relief of forgiveness, which would have made Garrett's task easier, but was not something Marcus owed him. He simply listened, which was in some ways the harder response to receive, because it gave nothing back and required the words to stand entirely on their own. "We are trying to correct that," Garrett said. Marcus looked toward the aircraft outside. The floodlights on the tarmac threw long white light across the wet November pavement, and the aircraft sat in it patiently, the way aircraft sit, indifferent to human drama, ready to go, waiting only for the humans to finish being human. "Are you correcting it because it was wrong?" Marcus said. "Or because someone important is coming?" The question arrived without heat, without accusation, with the direct, honest curiosity of a child who has not yet fully learned which questions are considered impolite to ask in public, or who has learned it and decided in this specific instance that the question matters more than the politeness. Garrett stood with the question. The honest part of him, the part that was still there, still intact despite everything, the part that 19 years of institutional habit had not managed to reach all the way through, recognized that the question deserved an honest answer. That anything less than an honest answer would be another mistake added to the evening's accumulation. "I think both," he said. Marcus absorbed this. He looked at Garrett for a moment longer with an expression that was not forgiveness and was not condemnation. It was something more neutral and more durable than either. It was the acknowledgement of a true thing. He looked back at the aircraft. Garrett walked back to the desk. At 9:52 p.m., the terminal door opened and Director Patricia Caldwell walked through it. She came without announcement and without the theater that authority sometimes uses to signal itself. No raised voice preceding her, no visible urgency in her stride, no performance of consequence designed to establish her position before she reached it. She simply walked into Gate B14 in a dark navy suit with two operations staff behind her, and the room reorganized itself around her arrival. The way rooms reorganize when someone enters who does not need to announce their own importance because it announces itself. She was 55 years old with the composed steadiness of someone who had spent most of her professional life arriving after mistakes had been made, arriving to assess them without the luxury of having been present when they were smaller and more easily corrected. She had run airport operations for 7 years. She had seen this shape of error before. Not this specific situation, not this specific child, but this specific pattern, the machinery of assumption moving quietly behind the language of procedure, running without interruption until something made it visible that could not be made invisible again. She stopped at the boarding desk. "Who is supervising this gate?" Garrett stepped forward. "I am, Garrett Haynes." She looked at him the way a careful person looks at something they intend to understand fully. Not unkindly, but without the interference of sympathy which would have gotten in the way. "Start at the beginning. Everything." He did. He kept it professional and factual and linear. Priority boarding called minor passenger without visible escort premium ticket. Apparent discrepancy between passenger appearance and booking class documentation request. Refusal to, he paused. He corrected himself. Hesitation to provide documentation. Security notification. He built the structure carefully the way a man builds something he is hoping, perhaps without complete certainty, will hold the weight he is placing on it. When he finished, Caldwell was quiet for a moment. She turned to Okafor. "Did the booking show any fraud alert?" "No, ma'am." "Identity mismatch?" "No." "Security flag of any kind?" "No." She turned to Brenda. "Was there a special handling note in the reservation?" Brenda looked at the folded paper on the desk. "Yes." "When did you find it?" The pause before Brenda's answer lasted exactly as long as it needed to in order to be honest. "Before security arrived." Caldwell received this without visible reaction. She allowed the silence that followed it to do what silence does when it follows an honest answer. Expand outward, fill the available space. Make the thing that was said more present than if she had immediately responded to it. Then she turned and walked toward Marcus. Every person in Gate B14 watched her cross it. The remaining passengers, the security officers, Garrett, Brenda. They watched her walk toward the boy against the wall because something in the quality of her movement made clear that whatever was about to happen was the most consequential thing that had happened in the gate this evening, and everything before it had been preparation. She stopped in front of him. Marcus looked up. "Mr. Webb," she said. Not son, not young man, not the boy or the minor or any of the categorical diminishments that the evening had offered. Mr. Webb. His name, his full name. The name on his boarding pass and his passport, and the notarized letter in his leather folder. Said clearly with precision in the hearing of everyone present, as if it were the only thing to call him, and had always been the only thing, as if any other way of addressing him had never been a real option. Marcus stood. He rose with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who has been sitting for a long time and is choosing to stand, choosing to meet this moment upright. Caldwell held his gaze. "I'm Patricia Caldwell. I'm the director of operations for this airport. I'm sorry for what's happened tonight." Marcus looked at her for a moment with those quiet, measuring eyes. He did not rush to accept the apology. He did not perform gratitude, which would have made her task easier and would have cost him something he had not agreed to spend. He received it the way you receive something you were owed, with the particular combination of relief and dignity that comes from being given what you deserved without having had to argue for it. "Were you treated appropriately?" she asked. He thought about it, visibly unhurriedly thought about it. The kind of consideration that takes a question seriously enough to actually consider it, rather than producing the first available response. "I was treated according to what people assumed I was," he said. The sentence moved through the gate the way certain sentences move, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a directionality that is impossible to stop once it begins. It found every person in the room and arrived at each of them slightly differently. At Garrett, it arrived like a formal finding. At Brenda, it arrived like something seen in a mirror that you cannot unsee. At the passengers who had watched without intervening, it arrived like a question that would travel with them out of the airport and into the days that followed. Caldwell nodded once. She received the sentence the way she received evidence, without argument, without softening as a fact to be documented and carried into whatever came next. "I understand," she said. Marcus looked at her steadily. "I think you do." Caldwell moved back to the desk and asked Brenda to open the full reservation history, the deep access screen, the one with timestamps and internal routing and authorization logs, and the complete record of every handling decision from the moment the ticket was purchased to the moment Marcus stepped into the boarding lane. Brenda opened it. They both read. The notes were there as they had always been, but beneath the VIP handling note, visible only in the complete access screen, the one that required a deliberate decision to go deeper, to treat the file as something that deserved more than a surface reading. There was a second line that standard gate access did not display without specific navigation. It read, "Client escort declined by family request. Passenger travels independently per executive security protocol. Do not interfere with standard access." Brenda read it twice, then once more. The words did not change. They said what they said. They had always said it. From the moment the reservation was created, the system had contained this information, patient and unambiguous, available to anyone who chose to look for it. Nobody had chosen to look for it, not until now. "Who reviewed this reservation before boarding opened?" Caldwell asked. Brenda answered quietly. "I did." "What did you see first?" "The class of service and the passenger's age." Caldwell nodded. She did not make it a punishment. She made it a fact because facts were what the next several weeks of formal review would require, and she was already 3 steps ahead of tonight in her thinking. She turned to Garrett. "And you proceeded with a public security challenge based on visible appearance." Garrett met her eyes. "Yes." "Despite no system flag?" "Yes." "No documentation failure?" "Yes." "No behavioral indicator of any actual security concern?" A pause, brief but complete. "Yes." Caldwell inhaled once slowly through the nose. Not dramatically, simply the breath of a person absorbing the full dimension of something before deciding how to proceed with it. At 9:58 p.m., the gate phone rang again. Brenda answered, listened, held the receiver toward Caldwell this time, not Garrett. Caldwell took it, Listen for 45 seconds without speaking. No yes, no acknowledgement, just listening. Then I see. And thank you. And I'll handle it from here. She returned the phone to its cradle with the quiet finality of someone completing one conversation in order to begin another. She turned to Garrett. Airport operations has been contacted by corporate counsel for Web Aero Group, she said. They are sending representatives to the gate. Garrett looked at her. Who is Web Aero Group? Caldwell's expression shifted for just a fraction of a second, something that was not quite disbelief but occupied its immediate neighborhood. The technology and infrastructure partner on O'Hare's current runway modernization contract, she said. They also hold an equity position in the parent company of the airline operating this flight. The silence that followed was complete. Brenda stopped what she was doing. She remembered to start again after a moment. Garrett looked toward Marcus. The boy was sitting in his chair, paper cup on the seat beside him, leather folder on his lap, watching the aircraft through the window. He looked exactly as he had looked when the evening began. Small, composed, wearing a gray hoodie that had been through many washes. He had not changed. He had not needed to change. Everything around him had changed instead in stages as the reality of who he was made itself known without him having said a word about it. Everything around him had changed. He had simply waited for it to do so. Okafor looked at Stoll. Stoll looked at her notepad. Neither of them spoke. The teenager near the window was very still. The woman with the press badge had stopped writing. She was watching Garrett with the clear, unguarded attention of someone recording something in the most permanent available medium. Not paper, not phone, but memory, which lasts longest and is least subject to deletion requests. Garrett stood in Gate B14 with the full weight of 19 years of professional authority in one very costly hour and felt for the first time that evening the true scale of what he had constructed at this gate. Not a managed incident, not a handled security concern, not a supervised delay. A record. He had built a record. Every person who had watched every phone that had filmed every word spoken clearly enough to carry across a quiet room. All of it was record now, and records had their own gravity, their own forward momentum, their own way of moving through time, long after the night that created them. He thought about the moment before the first question, the specific moment when Marcus Webb stepped into the priority boarding lane and Garrett looked at him. That moment isolated from everything that followed it. Before procedure, before documentation, before anything that could be called professional judgment in good faith. What had happened in that moment had nothing to do with security. Outside under the November floodlights, UA Flight 412 sat waiting. Inside, the gate door opened one more time. Warren Hargrove and attorney Lisa Farrow walked through it, and the room shifted again, finally completely, in the direction of the reckoning that had been moving toward Gate B14 since a 10-year-old boy in a worn gray hoodie placed his documents on a counter and said without elaboration or complaint, "Yes, ma'am." Warren Hargrove did not announce himself. In the particular ecosystem of institutional authority, where rank is almost always performed before it is established, where the arrival of important people is typically preceded by the noise of their importance. Warren Hargrove walked through the gate door at Gate B14 at 10:03 p.m. and made no sound at all beyond his footsteps on the terminal floor. He was 63 years old with the lean, unhurried build of a man who had spent 4 decades in rooms where patience was a more durable instrument than volume. His coat was plain black wool, his shirt white, no tie. No visible credential, no name badge, no assistant walking ahead to prepare the way. He carried nothing except a quality of attention that when it arrived in a room people felt before they could explain why they felt it. Attorney Lisa Farrow followed 2 steps behind him, late 40s, composed with a legal folder under one arm, in the particular stillness of someone whose professional purpose is to watch other people talk, measure what is said against what is true, and write down the difference with precision. She had the kind of careful composure that takes years to develop and never quite looks entirely comfortable, because it is not designed for comfort, it is designed for accuracy. Hargrove walked past the boarding desk without stopping. He passed Caldwell with a brief nod that contained its own complete sentence. "I see you, we will speak, but not yet." He walked directly across Gate B14 to where Marcus Webb was sitting in the chair beside the window with his paper cup of water in his leather folder and the aircraft sitting in the floodlights beyond the glass. He stopped in front of him. Marcus looked up. "Are you all right?" Hargrove said. No preamble, no positioning of himself within the hierarchy of the room, no introduction. Just the question, direct, genuine, asked first, because it was the most important question, and that was where important questions belonged. Marcus stood. He rose the way he had been doing everything this evening, carefully, without hurry, with the deliberateness of someone who treats each action as worth doing correctly. Yes, Mr. Hargrove. Hargrove studied him the way a doctor studies a patient when they are looking past the stated complaint toward the actual condition. Not rushing the assessment, taking the time to see what was actually there rather than what the surface was presenting. Then he nodded, a single slow movement of satisfaction. Were you left alone through this? Yes. Were you frightened? Marcus considered the question, really considered it, giving it the full weight of his attention before forming an answer. No, I was tired. Something moved across Hargrove's face. Not sentiment exactly, because sentiment was too soft a word for it. Something older. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of a man who had spent 63 years learning how the world worked and had just encountered in a departure gate on a Tuesday night a 10-year-old who already understood a substantial portion of it through his own experience rather than through anyone else's explanation. He turned. He turned toward Garrett Haynes with the unhurried patience of someone who has moved through anger into something colder and more permanent, the specific temperature that lives on the far side of anger, where decisions are made rather than reactions performed. You're the supervisor. Garrett straightened. Yes, sir. Garrett Haynes. Hargrove looked at him. Looked at him the way he had looked at Marcus, with the full weight of his attention, without hurry. Then without heat, without volume, with only the precision of someone asking questions they already know the answers to but want on record. Did you ask who he was before you called security? No. Did you ask why a 10-year-old was booked in seat 3A under executive handling protocol before you made that call? No. Did you look past the first screen of the reservation file before deciding he didn't belong in your boarding lane? Garrett's jaw moved slightly. No. Hargrove nodded once. He did not add anything to the three answers. He did not deliver the indictment the room was half expecting, the measured cataloging of failures, the formal articulation of what had been done wrong. He simply received the three answers and let them stand in the gate where every person present could see them and hold them. Because the answers were enough. More than enough. Speeches were for people who needed the room to understand something. Everyone in Gate B14 already understood. Farrow had her folder open. She spoke without looking up from it, in the flat, precise tone of someone reporting facts to people who need to have them reported. Security footage has been flagged for preservation. Passenger recordings, we have confirmed at least 4 separate uploads to social platforms in the last 22 minutes. Removal requests are already running behind the rate of spread. She turned a page. A columnist from the Global Finance Review is on the aircraft seat 7C and filed a written complaint with customer relations 18 minutes ago. One witness has identified herself to airline staff as a credentialed journalist. Corporate communications has been notified and is currently operating in reactive mode, which means the public version of this story is being written by people who were not employed at this airport tonight and will not be subject to correction by people who were. She closed the folder. That is the external situation. It will be managed. She looked at Caldwell. What concerns me more is the internal documentation. Caldwell met her eyes without hesitation. What do you need? The complete reservation history with timestamps intact. Security officer reports before any language revision. Witness statements from all staff present from the opening of boarding. And the specific gate handling protocol that permitted a publicly visible security challenge to proceed without triggering second-level documentation verification. The last item was not a question. Garrett heard his own name contained within it without it being spoken. Caldwell moved to this boarding desk and began pulling the documentation Farrow had specified, working with the systematic efficiency of someone who understood that the most valuable thing she could do in this moment was be completely transparent and completely fast. Transparency was the only position that could not be dismantled later. Everything else, explanation, justification, institutional framing, could be taken apart. Transparency could not. Garrett stood to one side. He was not excluded from the room. He was not asked to leave. He was simply no longer the organizing principle around which the room was oriented, and the adjustment from authority to subject, from the person managing the situation to the situation being managed was visible in the changed geometry of his posture with every passing minute. Brenda answered Caldwell's questions with the quiet honesty of someone who had made a decision somewhere in the last 30 minutes to stop managing the story and simply tell it. Yes, she had found the note. Yes, before security arrived. Yes, she had printed it. Yes, she had not shown it to Garrett. Why? Because he had committed publicly to a position, and once a supervisor commits publicly to a position, the institutional gravity of that commitment makes it very difficult for junior staff to be the visible force that reverses it. She said all of this clearly and in order without softening the parts that reflected poorly on herself, because the truth had its own shape, and softening parts of it changed the shape into something that was no longer entirely true. Farrow wrote it down. Okafor gave his account next sequential, precise strip of anything that was not factual. He noted the time of his arrival, the completeness of the documentation in Marcus's folder, the fact that the passenger had been actively prevented from producing that documentation before security was called. He noted this last fact once without emphasis and without editorial. He did not need emphasis. The fact carried its own weight. Stoll's account matched his in every verifiable particular. When the accounts were complete, Farrow closed her folder. Formal discrimination review through compliance, she said. Operational delay assessment and premium passenger handling violations as separate filings. Managerial conduct investigation. Gate supervisory discretion suspended pending outcome. She paused. That last item is protective in the first instance, protective of the process and of the airport's position. It is not punitive at this stage. Garrett received each item. He did not argue, did not explain, did not make the case for himself that he might once have made confidently. He had run out of the particular fuel that makes arguments possible, the conviction that you are right. Without that conviction, argument is just noise. He was not willing to produce noise. Caldwell turned to him. You will write a full incident report before you leave tonight. Not a summary, a complete account in chronological sequence without institutional language. What you saw, what you assumed, what you decided, in what order. She paused. Write it as if the person reading it will know the difference between a fact and a justification, because they will. Garrett looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, nothing else. He walked to the far end of the desk, took the operations tablet, sat down, and opened a blank incident form. He looked at the empty first field for a long moment. Then he began. Hargrove came back to Marcus. He settled into the chair beside him, the way you settle beside someone you intend to actually talk with, not positioned to deliver information, not angled to manage a situation, just beside him. Two people in adjacent seats at the same level, looking at the same window. Most of the remaining passengers had boarded. The jet bridge door was still open. Captain Merritt had been informed through channels that Caldwell had personally activated that resolution was imminent, and imminence had been delivered with enough authority that he had agreed to wait without further escalation. Hargrove looked at the aircraft beyond the glass. You asked us not to call right away, he said. Yes. Why? Marcus held the paper cup in both hands. He had been holding it intermittently for the last 40 minutes, not always drinking from it, just holding. The holding had been its own quiet anchor through the evening. He looked at the cup for a moment before he answered. I wanted to see if they would fix it themselves. And? Hargrove asked. A pause. Honest in its brevity, honest in its refusal to reach for a more comfortable answer than the true one. They fixed it when you arrived, Marcus said. Not before. Hargrove received this without visible reaction. He looked at the aircraft. Does that disappoint you? Marcus thought about it. He gave the question what it deserved, real consideration, the kind that takes long enough to be visible, the kind that produces an answer that is genuinely the answer, rather than the first available approximation of one. It tells me something, he said finally. I'm not sure if it disappoints me yet. I need to think about it more. What does it tell you? Marcus looked around gate B14. He looked at Garrett at the far end of the desk writing. He looked at Brenda standing very still with her hands folded, looking at a point in the middle distance that did not seem to contain anything, but was where her eyes had decided to rest. He looked at Audrey Fleming, who had come back through the jet bridge door at some point and was standing near the entrance with the quiet, deliberate presence of someone who had made a decision to witness this through to its end. He looked at Okafor, who met his eyes briefly and gave him the smallest possible nod, not approval, not sympathy, Simply, you are here. I see you. I have been here too. Then he looked at Hargrove. It tells me that most people are careful when they know who they're dealing with, Marcus said. And when they don't know, you see what they actually are. Hargrove was quiet. The aircraft sat enormous and patient beyond the glass, its running lights steady in the November dark. Your mother told me you were perceptive, he said. She did not tell me you were this perceptive. Marcus almost smiled. It did not quite arrive, but it came closer than anything else had come all evening. She said if I ever needed to understand a system, he said I should watch what it does when it thinks nobody important is watching. Hargrove looked at him sideways. And what does this system do? Marcus looked at the room one more time, at all the people in it, each of them carrying some piece of tonight that they would carry out of the airport differently than they had carried anything in. Then he looked back at Hargrove. It's still figuring that out, he said. Hargrove stood. He looked at Caldwell. She was watching him from the desk with the composed attention of someone waiting for direction from the top of a hierarchy she had just placed herself under. One question, Hargrove said. His voice was quiet enough that not every person in the gate could hear it, but clear enough that those close enough to matter did. What would have happened tonight if his name meant nothing? Caldwell held his gaze. She did not answer immediately. She knew the answer, had known it since she read the documentation, since she heard Brenda's account, since she stood in front of a 10-year-old and asked him if he had been treated appropriately. She was deciding whether to say it aloud in a room that contained a journalist, a legal representative, a security record, and a child who wrote things down in a leather notebook. She decided. The same thing that happened before you arrived, she said, just without a resolution. Hargrove nodded. He had expected that answer. He had needed it said aloud in public in front of witnesses at this hour, because some truths have to be named where people can hear them in order to have the weight they deserve. He looked at the gate one more time, at the remaining passengers who had stayed for the ending, at the teenager in the leather jacket who was no longer filming because the phone had come to feel inadequate for what was happening, too small a frame for something this specific and this large. At the woman with the press badge who was looking back at him with the neutral level attention of someone who has decided what the story is and is already composing the first sentence. He did not speak to any of them. He had nothing to say to witnesses. Witnesses were already doing their job. He walked back to Marcus. Are you ready to board? Marcus picked up his backpack from the floor. He put it on with both arms, settling the straps onto his shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who had worn it every day and knew exactly how it should sit. He picked up the paper cup, looked at it for a moment, and placed it carefully on the seat beside him. Not discarding it, just setting it down, releasing it the way you release something that has served its purpose. He picked up the leather folder. Yes, he said. Caldwell stepped forward from the desk. She positioned herself slightly in front of the boarding gate in the way that makes it clear to a room that what follows is addressed to the room and not to any single person within it. She waited for the ambient sounds to settle. Then she spoke. Before this flight departs, I want to be direct about what occurred here tonight. Her voice was even and professional and carried the particular weight of authority that does not need volume because it is built on clarity. A passenger with valid documentation, valid identification, and a valid booking was subjected to a public verification process that was initiated based on appearance rather than evidence. That is a failure of procedure and a failure of judgment. It will be reviewed formally, completely, and without institutional softening. She paused. I am sorry for what Mr. Webb experienced at this gate tonight. I am sorry it happened here. I am sorry it took this long to correct. The gate was absolutely silent. Not the tense silence of things unresolved. The different silence of something that has been said and received and cannot be taken back. Marcus stood with his backpack on and his folder in his hand, and he listened to the apology the way he had listened to everything this evening, with full, unhurried attention, without rushing to release anyone from discomfort, without performing the graciousness that would have made the moment easier for the people watching. He looked at Caldwell. Thank you, he said. Simple, direct, enough. He turned and looked at Brenda. Brenda was looking at him with an expression she was no longer trying to manage. The professional neutrality was gone, not stripped away by force, but simply no longer sustainable. What was underneath it was complicated in the way that real feeling is always more complicated than the presentations of feeling, not simple guilt, not simple shame, but the specific difficult compound that results from seeing yourself clearly in a moment. You cannot change from understanding what you did and why you did it and having to continue standing in the room where it happened. Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for telling the truth," he said, at the end. Brenda held his gaze. She could not speak, not because she lacked words, but because speech in that moment felt like it would take something from the moment rather than add to it. The holding of his gaze was what she had to offer. She offered it fully. Marcus looked toward the far end of the desk. Garrett had looked up from the tablet. He had heard Caldwell's statement, heard Marcus's response to Brenda, and was now sitting with the tablet on his knee and his hands still watching Marcus with an expression that was the most honest thing he had displayed all evening. Not regret performed for an audience. Something quieter and more private than that. The expression of a man sitting with something true about himself that he would have preferred not to know and now cannot unknow. Marcus looked at him. He did not offer absolution. He did not perform forgiveness, which would have been, in its own way, another kind of performance. A performance of magnanimity that cost him something real, in exchange for giving Garrett something he had not yet fully earned. He simply looked at him the way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you have seen the complete version of them, not just tonight's version, and that the seeing has been honest, that it will stay honest. That honesty is the only thing you are offering and the only thing worth offering. Then he looked at Okafor. Okafor was standing near the gate entrance, hands at his sides, face carrying the contained expression of a man who has spent a long career being the most decent version of his institution available in any given room, and who has made the particular peace that comes from accepting that this role is often lonely and always necessary. Marcus walked toward him. He stopped a few feet away. "Thank you for the phone call," he said. Okafor looked at him directly. "You handled yourself well tonight, better than most people twice your age would have." Marcus held his gaze. "You were the first one who looked at me like I was a person." Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, "You are a person," he said. It was a simple sentence. It should not have required saying. The fact that it did, the fact that it carried the weight it carried in that moment in that room after that evening, was the complete summary of everything that had happened at Gate B14 between 9:05 and 10:08 p.m. Every failure, every assumption, every procedural escalation, every moment of public silence from the people who watched and said nothing. All of it contained in the weight of that sentence and what it meant that the sentence needed to be said. Marcus nodded once. He turned toward the jet bridge. Audrey Fleming was standing at the door. She had returned a third time quietly at some point during the final proceedings and had positioned herself at the jet bridge entrance without inserting herself into the formal process. She was simply there, present in the way that she had decided from the moment she carried a cup of water across a departure gate that she was going to be present for this until it was finished. She held the door open. Marcus walked toward her. When he reached the door, he paused. "Seat 3A, she said. "Left side window. The crew know you're boarding." He nodded. "Thank you," he said, "for the water." She looked at him with an expression that was completely unguarded, the professional composure of 20 years set aside in the way you set aside a tool when the work it was built for is not the work that matters. "I should have done more," she said, not as self-flagellation, as a fact she had arrived at and was willing to say aloud. Marcus looked at her for a moment. "You brought water," he said, "in a room full of people deciding what I was. You just brought water." He touched the door frame briefly with one hand. A small gesture, the kind that does not announce its meaning because its meaning is between the two people involved and does not require announcement. Then he walked through the door. The jet bridge was quiet. Its light was the flat, functional light of purely transitional spaces, not warm, not cold, the in-between of a corridor designed to move people from one place to another, and nothing else. Marcus walked through it at his own pace. Backpack settled on his shoulders. Leather folder under his arm. Footsteps steady and unhurried on the textured floor. He did not look back. Not because there was nothing worth looking back at. Not because the last hour had left nothing that needed time and thought. But because this moment was for forward movement, for the simple, deliberate act of walking toward what had always been true, toward the thing that no amount of delay or challenge or public misidentification had ever actually changed his seat on his flight. He stepped through the aircraft door. The flight attendant at the entrance, tall, steady, briefed 4 minutes earlier on the specifics of the evening, gave him a nod of welcome that was direct and genuine. "Mr. Webb, welcome aboard. Seat 3A ahead on your left." Marcus nodded and walked forward. The business class cabin had the muted, settled quality of a space where most people have already found their arrangement for the next several hours, headphones on screens, lit books open. The columnist in seat 7C glanced up as Marcus passed, and then returned to her screen with the expression of someone who has a great deal to write and is already composing. The passenger in 4A watched him over reading glasses, then returned to his book. Seat 3A. Window. Left side. The seat with the best angle for watching the ground fall away. Marcus placed his backpack in the overhead bin with the careful economy of movement that comes from practice. He closed the bin, settled into the seat, adjusted the armrest. He looked out the window. The tarmac was wet. The floodlights made long white reflections across it, broken into irregular shapes by the texture of the pavement. Gate B14 was visible from this angle, a bright rectangle at the end of the terminal glowing against the November dark, smaller than it had been when he was inside it, but still present, still lit. He reached into the bag at his feet and removed the leather notebook. He opened it to the next blank page. He uncapped his pen. At the top of the page, he wrote the date, November, Chicago. Below it, UA 412. Below that, in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a child who had been taught that precision was its own form of respect, Gate B14. He paused. He looked out the window. The jet bridge was retracting now, pulling back from the aircraft with the slow mechanical certainty of a process that has been started and will complete itself. The ground crew moved in the floodlight below, small figures doing the methodical work that makes departure possible, indifferent to everything that had happened inside the terminal glass tonight and still doing what needed to be done. Marcus looked back at the blank space beneath his notes. He thought for a moment, a real moment, not the quick pause before a ready answer, but the longer pause before a considered one. Then he wrote one sentence beneath the date and the flight number and the name of the gate. He wrote it in the same careful hand, giving each word its proper space. He capped his pen. He closed the notebook. He looked out the window and watched Gate B14 through the glass until the aircraft began to push back and the gate slowly disappeared behind the turning angle of the aircraft's nose. And then he watched the runway instead, long parallel lines of blue and white lights extending into the November dark, marking the path forward. In Gate B14, the silence after boarding was different from all the other silences of the evening. The earlier silences had been dense with things not yet resolved, things not yet said, things hovering at the edge of consequence. This silence was cleaner. Not comfortable. Some of what had happened in the gate would remain uncomfortable for a long time for different people in different ways. But clean in the specific way that honesty produces cleanliness. The way a room feels after a true thing has been said and received and not taken back. Garrett sat at the far end of the desk with the completed incident report on the tablet before him. He had written it the way Caldwell had specified in sequence, without institutional softening, without the careful language that turns human failures into procedural anomalies and personal assumptions into policy gaps. He had written what he saw and what he assumed and what he decided and in what order, and reading it back had been uncomfortable in a way that told him he had written it honestly. He pressed submit. The report filed at 10:18 p.m. He sat with the empty tablet for a moment. Through the gate window, a Flight 412 had reached the runway. He could see its lights at the far end of the tarmac, the white of the nose, the red and green of the wingtips, the steady pulse of the beacon. The aircraft paused at the threshold with the particular stillness of something gathering itself. Then it accelerated. The lights moved slowly at first, then with gathering speed until they were running bright along the dark runway, and then the angle changed and the lights lifted, and the aircraft rose into the November night with the particular powerful elegance of something enormous, becoming briefly light, and the sound of it came through the terminal glass a half-second after the image, low and sustained and already fading, already belonging to the sky. Garrett watched it until it disappeared into the dark above the city. He sat for a moment after it was gone. Then he looked at the blank screen of the tablet in his hands and thought about a moment, a specific moment, simple and unremarkable, that had happened more than an hour ago. A 10-year-old boy stepping into a priority boarding lane. A look that had already decided something before a single fact was in evidence. That moment, He would think about it for a long time after tonight. He would think about it in the days that followed, in the formal review proceedings, in the conversations with compliance officers and HR representatives, and his own conscience, at hours when the institutional language fell away and left only what was true. He would think about it not because he was required to, but because it was the kind of moment that once you have seen it clearly, does not allow itself to be forgotten. Brenda was still at her station completing the closeout documentation that followed every departure. Her movements were correct. Her process was intact. The procedure continued as procedures continue, indifferent to the condition of the person executing it. But the person executing it was not the same person who had opened the priority boarding lane hours earlier. She was aware of the difference with every action, the way you are aware of a change in the quality of light not locatable exactly but present and impossible to pretend isn't there. Caldwell gathered her files. She paused at the desk before leaving. She looked at Garrett, then at Brenda. She let the look settle. "The formal review will take several weeks," she said. "Compliance will contact both of you in the morning." She paused. "In the meantime, there is something I want to be clear about." They waited. "This is not about one family," she said. "It is not about Web Aero Group or corporate contracts or which names produce which responses in which rooms. What happened here tonight happens in some variation every day in airports and offices and institutions across this country to people whose names produce no response at all. People who have no legal counsel to call, no representatives who arrive at gates. Those people do not receive a resolution. They receive the experience and they carry it, and the system that gave it to them continues without correction, because there is no record that forces correction." She picked up her files. "The reason this one gets corrected is not that Marcus Webb deserved it more than they do. It is that this one has witnesses. This time there is a record, and a record is only useful if the people responsible for it choose to read it honestly." She held their gaze for one more moment. "Read it honestly," she said. She left. The gate emptied slowly in the way that spaces empty, after events that were larger than the spaces that held them, not all at once but in stages. Each departure a small release of pressure. Okafor and Stoll completed their documentation and exited through the terminal entrance with the professional, unhurried composure of people who had done what they came to do and done it correctly. The remaining passengers moved out through the main concourse back into the ordinary life of the airport, carrying what they had seen toward wherever they were going next. The teenager in the leather jacket paused at the gate entrance and looked back once at the empty boarding lane. He stood there for a moment, long enough to mean something, not long enough to require explanation, and then walked on. The woman with the press badge was the last passenger to leave. She stood at the entrance for a long moment. She looked at Brenda. She looked at the empty chair beside the window where Marcus had sat. She looked at the paper cup still sitting on the adjacent seat, the one Audrey had filled, and placed the one Marcus had held for 40 minutes without finishing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she walked out without speaking, because some things have already been said in the only form that will last. The cleaning crew arrived at 10:31 p.m. They moved through the gate with the quiet competence of people who work in the space that exists after events, after the urgency and the drama and the record and the consequences in the space, where what remains is simply a room that needs to be restored to its ordinary condition. They emptied the bins, wiped the desk, collected the cups from the chairs. One of them picked up the paper cup from the seat beside the window, the one that had been water and then had been held and then had been set down with care, and dropped it into the collection bag without looking at it. Gate B14 looked ordinary again. Somewhere over the Midwest at cruising altitude in seat 3A, on a flight that had departed 49 minutes late and would arrive in New York still in time for everything that needed to happen there. Marcus Webb opened his notebook. He read the sentence he had written before takeoff. He read it once, then again the way you read something to confirm that it says what you meant it to say and not something adjacent to what you meant. He was satisfied that it did. He closed the notebook, replaced the cap on the pen, looked out the window at the dark below the scattered lights of towns and cities, the long unlit stretches between them, the vast and ordinary geography of a country conducting its night. He thought about the paper cup, the way it had been placed beside him rather than handed to him, the small specific difference of that choice, the way the difference had been large in a room where most things were going in another direction. He thought about Okafor handing him the phone without looking at Garrett first, The simplicity of it, the straightforwardness of a person deciding what the right action was and doing it without waiting to see whether the room approved. The way that kind of clarity in a space full of people who had lost clarity made itself visible simply by being what it was. He thought about Garrett's answer, I think both. An honest answer. The answer of a man who had not yet traveled far enough into understanding to feel what he had done, but had traveled far enough to stop pretending he had not done it. That was something. Not enough by itself, but something. The beginning of a longer journey that Garrett would have to make on his own and in his own time. And that had started whatever else might be said about tonight with honesty. He thought about what Hargrove had said to him once in a different airport, when Marcus was 7 years old and asking questions about the world that Marcus's mother had decided he was old enough to receive honest answers to. His mother had said it first. Hargrove had remembered it. The expensive part is never the delay. It's discovering what your people do when they think no one important is watching. Marcus looked at the closed notebook in his lap. He thought about the sentence he had written on the page beneath the date and the flight number and the name of the gate. The sentence he had written after a moment of real thought, after giving the question what it deserved, not what had happened to him, not a record of the evening's failures, but what he had learned that he wanted to keep, what he wanted to carry forward rather than leave behind. He had written, "The first person who treated me like I belonged there brought water." Remember that. That is always the first person. He looked out the window. The lights of the city below were thinning, giving way to the long dark between places. The darkness that is not emptiness, but distance. The darkness that is simply the country going about its night without needing to be seen. Above him, the sky was the deep particular blue that exists at altitude darker than the sky from the ground, lit faintly by stars that the ground's ambient light had always hidden. The aircraft moved through it without effort, without urgency, with the patient, sustained power of something built precisely for this altitude, this distance, this dark between one place and another, built for crossing. Marcus rested his head against the window. He looked at the dark for a while, at the thin, bright line, where the dark below and the dark above met at the horizon, and he thought about the evening. Not with anger, not with the kind of thinking that rehearses what should have been said and catalogs what went wrong, but with the quieter thinking that comes after something has been resolved, the thinking that is already sorting experience into what to carry and what to release. He had what he needed. He had the cup of water placed and not handed. He had the phone offered without permission being sought. He had Hargrove walking past the desk and coming first to him. He had Caldwell saying Mr. Webb in a room full of people who had been calling him everything except what he was. He had the sentence he had written which was true and which he would remember. He had enough. His eyes stayed open for a while longer, watching the dark below and the dark above, and the thin, bright line of the horizon, and then somewhere over the quiet geography between Chicago and New York, in the airspace above a country still learning what it claimed to believe about itself, his eyes closed. He slept the way children sleep when they are finally safe and know it. Quietly, completely, without apology.